The moment is now to introduce Simone Fattal, and it's an absolute dream come true that the legendary, amazing Simone Fattal is with us here today, because it's actually been our big unrealized project for almost 10 years to bring Simone to the Engadin, here to Zurich. Simone is an artist who is currently based in Paris, grew up in Lebanon, studied philosophy in Paris. You will hear also later her amazing work with archeology. Simone then actually returned to Beirut to become a painter. Due to the civil war, she then moved to California in the early 80s, where she founded the publishing house Post-Apollo Press. In the late 80s, that marks the return to sculpture of Simone. We're going to talk about that as well today. In 2013, Simone released a movie, autoportrait, and of course her exhibitions have happened over many years now in many, many museums in the world. And it's exciting that Simone is going to have an exhibition in Zurich, actually at Karma in 3 days. So she is here in the Engadin and then in Zurich, and we hope that you can all go to Simone's opening in Zurich next week. Please give a very, very warm welcome to Simone Fattal. Very warm welcome to Simone. Simone, I thought we could begin with the beginning, because we were listening yesterday to Rasha Salti's wonderful speech and conversation with Koyo about the garden as a space of regeneration. And I think the beginnings of your work at the very end of the 60s, you started to do watercolors and also pastels, pastels which are actually lost. They have been lost of trees and plants. And all of that has, of course, a lot to do also with a childhood memory, exactly of that, the childhood memory of Gardens of Regeneration. It's the house of your grandfather in Damascus, where you kept returning. It is also in that house that, to come back again to Rasha Salti's talk, where there was actually a courtyard of convening, which was very important for you. When you then had to go to boarding school at 12, that was a traumatic experience, and you always, at 11, and you always wanted to come back to this courtyard of convening and come back to this garden. So I wanted to ask you, tell us about these beginnings, about Damascus as an oasis, about this house, and then your beginning with art, when you actually started to draw these trees.
Okay, well, the courtyard in the traditional Arab house, it has a courtyard which always had a little basin of water, a fountain, and then fruit trees and some flowers. But it was very much the same trees and flowers. It was, the thing is, for the Islamic garden, it's the contrary of the Eden that was talked about yesterday. Actually, there are depictions of the paradise in the Quran, and therefore people wanted to create that paradise in their lives. And the courtyard and the Islamic garden is actually what they did for that translation. The Arabic house has maximum 3 courtyards. Even the Alhambra, you could be a king, have only 3 courtyards. The first one was the smallest because it was to receive the strangers. The big one was for the family, because the women didn't go out so much, so they had to have a huge, convenient, beautiful space. So the main courtyard was the second courtyard, and the third courtyard, if you were rich enough to have 3, usually you had 2. I mean, my grandfather had 2. The courtyard, of course, is where people gather, where people, life takes place around. So there's a center. And the garden has always a center around which come water, comes these wonderful fountains which bring water, and usually it's divided in four. I mean, you have seen many reproductions of these gardens. This house was for me, as they wanted to make it, I could see that it was a depiction of paradise. It was a paradise to be there. The sense of the flowers, the sense of the trees, and the intimacy of everybody being there. So when you go to boarding school, of course, it's a drama. You don't have any of that.
And then when you started with art, there was this epiphany in '69 when all of a sudden you started to make these drawings. Can you tell us about these trees?
Well, because when I started painting, the first thing that comes to mind is the trees, because for me, life, as you just said, I mean, the Amazon forest is the life of the planet. And we realize when we have trees that we need this life. And I started doing a lot of pastel, which were very big, of all kinds of colors following the seasons, but they're lost. It's gone.
What is not lost is a series of drawings. You just come back actually from an exhibition where you exhibited also very early drawings, which are kind of improvised drawings with music. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, that was the exhibition is now in Beirut. We had a friend who had met a small group of musicians. The hippies used to go from Europe to India, and Beirut was absolute obligatory stop. And this band was lost in Beirut because they didn't have money enough to go on with their trip. So my friend took them in, but after a while, they were 5 or 6. She needed somebody to help. So I invited the guitarist, and he stayed with me something like 3 months. And of course, it was boring. My studio was small. He played the guitar, and I did a huge number of drawings of portraits of him playing. So it was the music and he, and well, it was really, these drawings are what you can remember of the hippie times. Happy, carefree, and at the same time, we were doing work, you know. So, yeah.
And we also, of course, wanted to talk about the next chapter, which leads us to books, because you were talking in our previous interview, civil war, Lebanon, and you then went to the US, and one of the very first things you actually did is you stopped making paintings, you stopped making drawings, but you went into books. And you told me that you were kind of born to read books and make books. You were always reading as a child, and the kind of agency of books, because books travels, you can't stop books, no? Nothing can really stop books, and the freedom of a book, the sort of agency of a book prompted you to do your own press, the post-Apollo press. And what is particularly fascinating is that it began actually with a book of E.A.T with an A to Z. There is, of course, also the A to Z of Claire Parnin and Gilles Deleuze, but this is the A to Z of E.A.T. And it's a book which had a lot to do with the feeling of almost being powerless facing this atomic threat of that time. And there was this 3 Mile Island incident, and I think a friend of yours, Laura Kleger, was involved, and there were lots of discussions, and all of a sudden E.A.T wrote this poem, and you decided really to do a publishing house for this poem. Can you tell us about A to Z and how Post-Apollo Press began. And then maybe also that could be a segue, because we were also thinking that this would not only be a conversation, but that maybe there would also be a reading.
Yes, you said, when I was a child, literature reading was my priority. I never played, I really read. And art was not something I had ever thought I would do. It came way, way back later. So when I left, so to talk about from A to Z, Ethel had a friend who was a photographer, and he was in New York when the 3 Mile Island nuclear accident happened, and he wanted to go and interview people and make photographs. And he invited Ethel to come with him, but she said, I don't want to go near any nuclear explosion. I will write a poem. And she wrote from A to Z. Then time went by. When I had to leave Lebanon, my studio and my paintings, it was such a traumatic experience that when I arrived in California, I didn't want to paint, and I started the publishing house. And the first thing I published was that poem about the 3 Mile Island nuclear accident. And then when you start publishing houses, you have to go on, because if you don't go on, the books die. So I did it for 30 years. So have I answered your question?
Yes, and I think it would be so wonderful if you could read us an extract from the book, because I always think there should never be a conference without a moment of poetry reading. And as we did in Paris, when E.A.T happened in Paris, you did this magnificent reading. I thought today, for all of us, it would be a dream if you could read us some extracts from E.A.T.
So it was written in New York during that time. I will read it. So instead of giving numbers to the pages, Ethel thought she will give them the alphabet in letters. So it's A, B, C from A to Z. That's the title of the book. So I will read from A to Z. Is it that you prefer the raven and the cow to me, i.e., the language and the cloud? April is the cruelest month, and December the darkest. Gone are the East River and the fallout sky. Manhattan is rising instead of the sun. Great flowers are falling just after the rain. Samuel Beckett is sipping tea at the corner of Worcester and Spring. Uproar 1 and 2. The mayor is dead. From the east end to the west, the trains are falling apart like Marilyn Monroe used to. Ronald has a spittoon, the lagoon has the moon between its legs playing ball. 2 pennies on the rug make a woman bend like a soldier coming back from war. Rooms are so full of noise nowadays that angels cover their faces with blood. If I told you I love you, would you believe that airplanes fly at night? No, let it go. You came up with stairs and coffee. I lost the key to the butter. The Midwest is over there and white. I took too many snapshots while you were swimming. You told me my eyes are blue and I have cancer. Only the government knows. Adding 1 + 1, zeroing on infinity, listening to the radio, killing cockroaches, early morning, going to California. Did you count the speed of the rocket and the waterfalls of the park? They walk beside their bicycles. Did you tell your dog that he's hungry for butterflies? I come in and out of rooms full of armchairs and metal bars. Cities are beams of light because a truckload of mushrooms spilled over the Lincoln Tunnel. Tremendously, the Continental Divide marches on New York City. 10, 2, and 1 are coming close to nothing. The Buddha is dancing in the Whitney Museum, and the moon is bored. The Columbia River went shopping. We were making love on the couch. The Spider-Man came through the window. Your mother rang, so we watched TV. When the superior decisions descend from the electronic boards in the middle of your brain, why do you shout the police is coming? You know it's only your mother and sometimes her latest husband. Otherwise, it's the sea. The car jumped off the bridge. The parachute refused to open. The body was not in the morgue. It didn't go home either. There was a pile-up of cars all the way to Denver. Between the Hudson and the East River, there is a strawberry garden. Helicopters come and go, carrying dead Indians, formerly buried under the plains. There was a transfer of power between the mouse and the deer. It happened in Central Park while you were on a glider and on your skis. A mountain was pulsating in the thin air.
Thank you so much, Simone. One thing we also wanted to talk about is, of course, the importance in your work of storytelling and for togetherness. No, and yesterday, in many of the talks, this idea of how we can create togetherness in a fragmented world came up. And again, in Russia's talk, we had this quote of Chamoiseau, Patrick Chamoiseau, with whom I spoke a lot, with Edouard Glissant, actually, when we did the conversations with Glissant. Russia, you quoted this idea that storytelling for Chamoiseau is a kind of a dramaturgy, no, of an encounter, and that is indeed something Chamoiseau always talked about, and it seems to be the same almost with your exhibitions, that there is a kind of a dramaturgy of encounter through storytelling, and we have images in the background of many of, many of your amazing shows. There have been recent shows, very remarkable shows in Milano, at the ICA, in Venice, TBA 21, in Pompeii, which connected you or reconnected you to archaeology, at Porticus. And in many of these exhibitions and the images we see, there is actually a connection to stories. And very often it's actually a very present way of talking about the vocabulary from the past. You visit very ancient stories. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, well, with all these commissions that I had, for instance, at ICA Milano, I was asked to do a show about Pompeii. And I went to Pompeii to visit for the first time. And what did I see in Pompeii? I saw the Roman Empire, which was Egypt, Phoenicia, Greece, and of course, Rome. So the whole world was connected. The whole world was what we know of it, was the Roman Empire. And so when I did the show, I showed all these aspects, from Egypt to Rome. And these connections have never been non-existent. I mean, Egypt, I'm speaking of the Egypt of the Pharaoh, was known to Greece and vice versa. And I try to show this in my work. The second exhibit that I can talk about in that kind of thing was the one in Venice last year. It was in a church. I was given a church. So already a church is a place for gathering, for putting people together for one purpose. This is not one purpose, but at least to talk together. And the theme was Mediterranean. Again, you know, the Mediterranean, it's like the Roman Empire. It's every city around the Mediterranean is in contact with everyone else. But in that particular instance, I wanted to bring, because Venice was a power that had a commerce with the East a lot, and the commerce with the East, one of the most important one was the commerce of the pearls. And the pearls came from way beyond the Mediterranean, from the Persian Sea. And therefore, I brought a tale from the Persian Sea to the Mediterranean, and I did this installation. Putting all those words together because they were all together. And we are today, we think we are fragmented, but we should more focus on what brings us together instead of dividing us.
Thank you. And one sort of very old epic story. One very old epic story is the story of Zel Hima. You told me a lot about that, and you told me that it's 10 volumes, I think, or it's like almost 10,000 pages. I only could find a very small extract translated actually and published by Penguin, which is about this tale of the warrior woman of Zel Hima and the son Abdel Batab. Can you tell us about what makes this epic particularly important to you?
Yes. Well, first of all, this epic has been gone out of the minds of people, even in the Arab world. They know the name, but they don't know what it is. I came across it because I have a friend who wrote a book on the narrative in the Arab world, and she mentioned that epic. And when I said, "What is this epic?" she said, "I didn't read it, I only know the name." And so I looked for it. It is an epic of 8 books of 1,000 pages each. Now, I didn't read it all. I read 1.5. But it's the first picaresque novel. It was written probably at the same time as 1,001 Nights. And it's about a woman who was a chevalier, how do you say, a chevalier, you know. And she was in charge of defending the caliphate against the Byzantine Empire. So she was sent, she was born in the Arab Peninsula, and she was sent to the frontier in northern Syria to fight the Byzantine. Of course, it's a war that has never ended. It was always one after the other one. You know, war is something that men love to do. I mean, they tell them, let's go to war. Ooh, let's go to war. They love it. And it's always another war, even when they see the result, which is destruction and death and illness. But they go on. And anyway, it's a fascinating tale because it it talks about all the problems we talk about today. With, first of all, gender. We have a woman who's a warrior. She didn't want to get married. She wanted to be married to her sword. But of course, you know, she was persuaded to marry. Then there is problems of racism, because by extraordinary thing, she had a black child, and everybody was appalled, you know, and thereon. And then she had another woman warrior with whom she made Voir, who's a queen of the Uyghur. And the queen of the Uyghur was extremely bent on making love. She loved to have a lover for few days, and so on and so forth. I mean, all these themes were talked about with such I mean, today you don't write in such a very crude and interesting way. So I started making these people. I made many pieces about Zel Hima, about the queen of the Uyghur, about the lover who was extraordinary in more than one way, and etc., etc. And the beautiful horse, because the first 500 pages were about a horse that was so beautiful that everybody wanted to steal it. Anyway, I like the narrative because it embodies the whole culture of a people. The epics are to do like that. So.
You can actually find this book as a translation in English. Tale of Princess Fatima, Warrior Woman, the Arabic epic of Zel Hima, published by Penguin, is a very small extract of these many, many thousand pages. I would want this conversation to go on forever, but I know that we soon have to come to a conclusion. There are two or three last things I wanted to ask you. Maybe one in relation also to actually your next journey, because you go from here to Sils Maria and you'll visit the Nietzsche house. And it's kind of interesting, I think, to bring up Nietzsche also in relation, of course, to the topic of the Engadin art talks, but also in relation to a conversation you, E.A.T and I had in Erki about 3 years ago, where we spoke a whole afternoon about this notion of pulsion, of puissance de vie, of élan vital. And I thought it could be very nice to hear a little bit from you about that, just whilst you're on your way to Sils Maria.
Yes. Well, the will to power of which Nietzsche speaks, E.A.T and I myself think that it is a desire for more life, for more vitality. Like the color brings to the flower more power. You know, color is power, actually. It's life. So because life is something you can't stop. This is why powerlessness is practically really impossible while you are still alive. You can see it, for instance, we talked about the prisons yesterday. So many prisoners end up making a mutiny. Even in their desperate situation, they find the strength to rebel. Rebellion is the first thing that a young boy, a young girl do. They want to live, they want to fight their parents, they want to grow up. And this is what élan vital is. It's love of power.
My very last question is about the unrealized project. As you know, I'm always asking you about the unrealized project, and you wanted to talk about another artist's unrealized project. It's a conversation you had with, actually about two people's unrealized project. You had conversations with the artist Botero and also with the former President Jimmy Carter, and we're going to then segue from there into your own unrealized project. Let's talk first about this very unlikely encounter of Botero and Jimmy Carter.
Okay, well, there was an exhibit I saw in Berkeley, California, about Botero. You all know this beautiful, great painter. He depicted a whole body of works, huge paintings, based on the pictures that had been leaked during the Iraqi war about Abu Ghraib, the infamous prison. And those pictures are amazing because with his craftsmanship, he's such a great painter. They look like paintings from the Quattrocento. They are fantastic. Even when you see these men blindfolded and given to the dogs, it's full of tenderness at the same time. Well, this, I was lucky to be there by chance. But he had said, these paintings are not for sale. I don't, otherwise you think he wants to make profit out of a terrible situation. But I'm ready to give those paintings to any institution who wants to show them. And I think none came up, and these paintings have never been seen. It's very hard to have the catalog. So years later, I meet Botero. He was having his painting the orchestra made in a tapestry in France. And I went to his Tombé de Métier and I went to talk to him. I said, thank you for this extraordinary work. He said, oh, we need more of those. And this sentence I had heard from President Carter, because as a publisher, I attended the American Booksellers Association, which meets once a year. And they do a beautiful breakfast with the main writers they want to put, of course, en l'avant. And Carter had written 2 books, one of poetry and one about his first trying to become a governor against the odds of his Georgia governor. Anyway, so after his talk, I went to him and I said, thank you again for doing the wonderful peace that you were able to achieve in the Middle East. And he said, we need much more of those. The same sentence. It's come amazing.
Now the segue into your unrealized project, Simone, because it's again connected to the beginning, no? When we talked about the garden, because you have a dream actually, and the project I really hope will be realized soon of building or making a garden.
Well, this idea of this garden comes from a text by Ibn Arabi. Ibn Arabi says that he saw in a dream a wall of bricks, which were the 99 names of God, but 2 were missing, and he saw himself as, because he wanted to be the one who explained the best the philosophy, that he was the 2 missing bricks. And my idea to represent that dream of his was to do a garden with 99 trees, all of them would flower with white flowers and 2 with pink flowers. I hope I can have it done.
That could not be a better conclusion. We can now take 1 or 2 questions. Do we have questions for Simone?
Where are the Botero paintings, please?
I don't know. It's a very good question. We should ask. Now he's not there anymore.
Any other questions? If not, thank you so much, Simone. I'm going to conclude with a sentence from you. a beautiful quote. You once said, "Yesterday saw the new moon. This morning the sun is shining. Time runs around." Thank you so much, Simone. Thank you.